ברברה היא ראש מערכת Defense News בישראל וכתבת בחירה של Space News, ועוקבת ומלווה את תעשיות החלל בישראל ואת מערכת הביטחון בארץ הרבה שנים, לפחות משנת 99, וידידה טובה של המכון. אז אני מזמין את ברברה לנהל את המושב. תודה רבה.
Thank you, Tal, and good afternoon, everyone. It's such a privilege to be part of this fabulous annual event honoring Colonel Elon Ramon and the brave souls of the STS-107 mission. Our subject this afternoon is international cooperation in the domain of space, cooperation that was so manifest by the brave Columbia crew. May their memories be blessed, but also celebrated. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Valerie Neal. Dr. Valerie O'Neill has been a space history curator at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum since 1989. She engages in scholarly research, exhibit development, artifact collection, and public service. Dr. Neal has edited 2 books on space exploration, curated 3 major exhibitions. I think I've seen them all, fabulous. And she led the effort to restore the Space Shuttle Enterprise for permanent display and to acquire the Space Lab in Spaceship One for the National Collection. Dr. Neal was also very involved in the transfer from NASA to the Smithsonian of the Space Shuttle Orbiter Discovery. She's now working on a book on spaceflight, on dealing with the shuttle era, and 2 Smithsonian Channel documentaries on the shuttle. And Dr. Neal is going to speak to us about international cooperation as manifest through the program. Please, Dr. Neal.
Well, it is indeed a pleasure and a privilege to be here to share this occasion with you. And it's especially daunting to take the podium after such a stimulating and moving morning that we have had. Now I found it. I think, oh, this is okay, thank you. Forward, oh, okay. Oh, okay. Sorry, new technology. Well, welcome to the International Space Station. The space station is often described in superlatives as arguably the most complex, the most challenging, multinational, technical endeavor ever undertaken in peacetime. Against the great odds of any project that is carried out over 3 decades, involving 15 sovereign states, 5 large bureaucracies, and countless government, industrial, corporate, and academic participants, and with the vagaries of national, political, and economics, the International Space Station is not only complete, but has been continuously occupied for more than 12 years by more than 30 crews of 2 to 6 people at a time, and at one time accommodated 13 people with a visiting shuttle crew. Important work is being accomplished there now, and its future looks very promising. The origins of the International Space Station may be traced to a joint test project carried out in 1972 to 1975 during a temporary thaw in the Cold War. Although Soviet and American scientists had been exposed to one another at international conferences, it was inconceivable during the space race years that these 2 rival nations would ever cooperate in space. Although the effort was not sustained, some important foundations and lessons were learned for future collaboration from this pioneering project. The United States space program included the idea of a space station from the very beginning. In the 1950s, the unlikely combination of Wernher von Braun and Walt Disney and a group of scientists and artists had popularized the idea of an outpost in Earth orbit, including television shows. In fact, a space station was in NASA's first strategic plan in 1959, and it was reaffirmed in the 1969 strategic plan. After the Apollo landings on the moon, the first thing NASA did was launch Skylab as an experimental space station, and it was occupied by 3 crews from 1973 to 1974, while the space shuttle was being developed. The shuttle, of course, was necessary to serve as a ferry for the assembly and servicing of an eventual space station. And by the 1980s, serious planning was underway, as you can see from these illustrations. First, following Skylab, this power tower configuration, a long central spine of a space station, which evolved into a concept for a boxy dual-keel space station, which then further evolved into a concept for Space Station Freedom, and ultimately culminated in the International Space Station that we know today. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union proceeded quickly to establish a whole series of space stations throughout the 1970s and 80s, expanding and improving upon each one and building up a significant base of experience in long-duration spaceflight and space operations. More than one of their astronauts spent upwards of 200 days in space, then 300 days in space, and finally exceeded a total of a year in space. Steadily and incrementally, the Salyuts of the 1970s paved the way to Mir, an impressively large and elaborate home and research lab in space that grew in size and capability over a 15-year period, setting the pattern, really, for how to build a space station piece by piece. As the United States developed the space shuttle, it also invited participation by aspiring space agencies in Europe, Canada, and Japan. The goal was to foster the capabilities of other nations to develop hardware for human spaceflight, to gain experience in human spaceflight operations, to fly their own astronauts, and gain more access from space, and to benefit from that greater access to space. Now, of course, other nations were already active in space, launching satellites, both scientific and communication satellites, reconnaissance satellites, and such. But the goal at this point was to increase the number of spacefaring nations with humans in space from 2 to a growing indefinite number. The international successes in the Space Shuttle program included Space Lab, the Canadarm Remote Manipulator System, many scientific investigations, and astronauts from these participating nations. Based on these successes, international partnerships on a grander scale were negotiated in the 1980s and 1990s, with increased roles and responsibilities for Space Station Freedom, which was not built, then another space station concept, Alpha, which also was changed, and finally culminating in the International Space Station. These were tumultuous years and years of change. From 1986 to 1998, when the Space Station intergovernmental agreements and the interagency memoranda of understanding were signed. During this time, NASA and the United States government struggled to control the cost of building a space station. Political support wavered. The station kept getting smaller and taking longer to develop, and the international partners experienced uncertainty and frustration. Then, to everyone's surprise, the Soviet Union collapsed. NASA and Russia embarked on a series of joint shuttle Mir missions, and Russia joined the Space Station Partnership. Then the real work began to build step by step, module by module, one solar array at a time, a combination that was a home, a power station, a port for cargo and passenger vessels, a construction zone, and a suite of state-of-the-art laboratories for microgravity research in the life sciences and material sciences. A huge research center flying about 225 miles or 350 kilometers above Earth that was assembled over 10 years with about 40 launches. Truly unprecedented. And we'll pause here for a moment just to watch the assembly occur. For those of you who are familiar with American-style football, the International Space Station is both the length and the width of a football field. I'm sorry, that appears a little bit dark to you. It's much brighter on my screen. The number of extravehicular activities that were involved in connecting the parts of the space station far surpassed the complete number of extravehicular activities from the entire U.S. space program up to that time. It was a phenomenal physical effort and technical effort to assemble this station in Earth orbit. We're still building these solar arrays now, the long arms, and we're about to see the arrival of the European laboratory module in just a moment. Here comes the Columbus laboratory module, to be followed by the Japanese laboratory module. And the US laboratory module is right near the center, under the axis to which the solar arrays are attached. The Russian end of the International Space Station is just off the top of the screen, consisting of 2 modules and an airlock. And we seem to have paused here, so I'll continue. So what are the elements of international cooperation? The foundation is legal, diplomatic, and administrative, defining and balancing the roles, rights, and responsibilities of partner nations and agencies. Diplomacy and negotiation are at the heart of the process to create a true partnership among equals, not a host and guest relationship. A mutual respect, cooperative problem solving, shared decision making are essential for effective partnership. Then there are the technical challenges of building and operating a space station of any size. But this is complicated exponentially by the international effort. The engineering rigor and standardization to ensure that components, systems, and elements made in one place, assembled in another, and finally mated in space required an unprecedented degree of discipline and communication. Many have said that the greatest achievement of the International Space Station is almost a miracle, that everything fit together and works as planned. Much of the engineering discipline can be achieved by numbers and equations, but forging a partnership from different political, technical, and social cultures is harder. Different currencies, time zones, and languages are the simple challenges. Partnership involves respecting and working out differences in attitudes and practices, values and vision, the intangibles of national and professional norms that, like those in a marriage or a family or a workplace, require learning and adapting, patience and perseverance, tolerance. The partners must believe in and remain committed to the relationship, for better or worse. On a personal level, these differences are encountered and negotiated by individual crew members who must reach accord on such mundane matters as which foods are acceptable on board, how much privacy does each person need, when does the work schedule need adjustment, who has to clean the toilets. Harmonious relationships and teamwork are essential for long-duration space flight. After all, you can't just step outside to relieve some stress. And the crews must be committed to meet that challenge despite their individual differences. While proudly wearing the flag of their own nation, they must also think and act in the common interest as one team dedicated to shared goals. In 2009, the International Space Station, as it neared completion, the Multilateral Coordination Board issued a report that presented some 56 major lessons learned from the endeavor. And chief among those were these, that it was absolutely essential to have a shared vision that transcended national interest, and that the partners who were involved in the space station enterprise had to keep that vision foremost. When times were rough, they had to use that as their touchstone to ensure that that goal would be met. They needed formal frameworks like these interagency agreements, and schedules, of course. They needed that formality to keep everyone marching to the same beat. But they also needed flexibility so that they could adapt to complications and to differences that arose, to the unexpected. And they needed to set realistic goals and expectations, not to go into this starry-eyed and assume that everything would go smoothly, but to adapt expectations and goals that were realizable step by step. And in the course of this 30-year effort then, the competition of the 1960s has evolved to cooperation, and even beyond cooperation, to collaboration, joint planning, joint execution. And the ultimate outcome of that, and I think it was a consensus agreement, that though it is a lot of effort to engage in international partnership, it's worth the effort. They also summarized the global significance of the International Space Station partnership and what its legacy for the future already is. And almost every speaker this morning has already said this, that the International Space Station is a model for working on global challenges. Its primary result is the expansion of shared knowledge, but perhaps its unintended consequence is that it has laid a foundation for how nations might share together in tackling other great challenges that face us today. It's certainly a foundation for future ventures in space. It's quite unlikely that programs like missions to Mars or even missions back to the moon can be afforded by and executed by nations working alone. It's most likely to be international efforts. And then certainly there is the inspirational value of this kind of enterprise. So it looks to me, as a historian, as if the present challenges ahead, barring some disabling technical problem or damage, are the sustainability of the space station politically and economically. Technically, it's working well. Its future looks very bright. But in the changing political and economic environments in which we live, that future could be jeopardized. It will require the steadfast commitment of all the partners to ensure that the space station fulfills its planned life to 2020 and beyond. As more transportation options become available, the viability of the space station should be enhanced, if for no other reason than that supplies and repair equipment can be transported there. Already, Israel and more than 60 other nations are working with the international partners to become more involved in using the space station for research. Additional transportation options will also help them expand their access to the station. One of the great idealistic hopes of this historic endeavor is that international cooperation, collaboration, and partnership in space will bear similar fruit here on our troubled Earth.
Thank you, Dr. Neal. Thank you so much, Dr. Neal. That set the stage so perfectly for our roundtable to come. And if I may, before you go down the steps, I just have a trivial question for you. Is it true you were talking about all the logistical and cultural and time zones and all these things that had to be overcome to achieve such cooperation? Is it true that the Russians and the Americans have different standards for water? Does anybody know? Something to think about. Okay. I would like to introduce in alphabetical order, one by one, the participants of our roundtable discussion on international cooperation. And as I'm introducing them, please, you can feel free to come up and take your seats. And the first distinguished panelist really needs no introduction, Jean-Jacques Dordain. I believe this year will mark 1 decade in his role as director of the European Space Agency. During that time, Dordain has become the face, the branding, if you will, for cooperation among ESA's 20 member states, nearly a dozen other partners throughout Europe, including Israel, as well as major space powers, as well as major space powers in the United States, Russia, and nations of the Far East. Little fact about some background on the ESA. It has an annual budget of 4 billion euro, offers multiple levels of international cooperation, and by and large has lived up to its promise of juste retour, fair return, excuse the pronunciation, meaning that over time, for every 100 euros that a country invests in ESA programs, 90 of them will flow back to the benefit of local industry. So thank you, Mr. Dordain. Our next panelist is Mr. David Kendall, and he is Senior Executive and Science Advisor for the Canadian Space Agency based in Quebec. Canada enjoys special status in the European Space Agency, and the Canadian Space Agency has a base budget of $300 million. It is facing cuts of about 10% over the next 3 years, and we'll hope to hear more about that. A little bit more on Canada's industry. It's world-renowned for its robotics sector, which provides the manipulation arm for the space shuttle and the robotic system for the space station. And along with Israel, Italy, and Germany, Canada is a world leader in radar satellites. Earlier this month, the Canadian government announced a $692 million contract to build the RadarSat constellation mission, which will be a constellation of 3 satellites slated for launch in 2018. Thank you. Our next panelist, Dr. Geir Newport. He's been director of the Netherlands, thank you, Netherlands Space Office since 2006. His country is a founding member of ESA and hosts ESA's Space Research and Technology Center. The Dutch Space Center includes 60 small and medium enterprises with an annual turnover of about 120 million euro. And our research shows that the Dutch industry has actually gained a consistent return rate on ESA investment of more than 100%. So hopefully we'll be able to touch on that. And next, is Enrico Saggesi. He's president of the Italian Space Agency since mid-2009, following a very distinguished 32-year career in the Italian aerospace industry. A founding member of and top-tier financial contributor to the European Space Agency, Italy contributes about 400 million euro annually, some 53% of its budget, to ESA. Mr. Saggesi's strategic vision for space through 2020 divides its financial contributions to and industrial participation with ESA into 5 sectors, but it clearly has granted priority for Earth observation, access to space, and deep space robotic exploration. At the national level, Italy aspires to launch at least 2 observation satellites every 7 years, and hopefully the Italian-Israel hyperspectral Shalom satellite will be on your manifest soon. And lastly, our speaker from the Russian space agency, Roscosmos, is Denis Liskov. Denis is head of the international department at Roscosmos. And Denis? And his very capable translator. Thank you. Please take a seat. Russia's space budget for 2013 is about 120 billion rubles. That's about $4.2 million. And for the 3 years from 2013 to 2015, their budget is projected at $500 billion rubles, which is about $20 million. And by that time, the Russian Space Agency's annual budget will have exceeded that of the European Space Agency. Just to dazzle you with more budgetary figures, between 2013 and 2020, Russia plans to budget $70 billion, 2.5 trillion rubles to its space program. One of the key features for Russia, its space strategy that was published last April, prioritizes investment spending on Earth observation and communication satellites, as well as manned transport vehicles. And Moscow is also building a site in Vostochny for future Soyuz launches, and the site will supplement, not replace, I'm told, will supplement the Baikonur Cosmodrome, which Russia rents from Kazakhstan for about $150 million a year. Aside from being the world's sole provider of human transport vehicles and an anchor partner in the International Space Station, Russia contributes significant space assets in support of the UN World Weather Watch. And in November, this is interesting, in November, ESA members approved Russia as its partner in the ExoMars mission. This is a role that was formerly reserved for the Americans. So under a soon-to-be finalized deal, Russia is going to provide 2 Proton rockets, the first to launch the telecommunications orbiter in 2016, and the other for a planned 2018 launch of the European rover and its Russian-made descent module. So, and I'd like this to be as casual and free-flowing and void of structure as possible. And let's see how it goes. I'd like to field the first question to Mr. Goldman. And it has to do, one second. It has to do with the recent ministerial meeting of ESA in Naples. And there the council did agree on what was it, 10 billion euros for the next coming years. It seemed that they were unable to make a definitive decision on the future direction of the launch, and they ended up with some kind of a compromise with the midlife extension of Ariane 5, as well as initial work on the Ariane 6. ESA, I believe, was also vague with regard to its commitments on the International Space Station beyond 2020. So, and you'll have opportunity to correct me. But would you please, sir, share with us the highlights from this very important ministerial meeting last November as they pertain to cooperative programs? And I'd like to ask you specifically, can you state definitively whether ESA is committed to the International Space Station beyond 2020?
Okay, so it's a lot of questions, but yes, the last council at ministerial level took place in November in Naples, and I think that the 20 member states have decided have taken a lot of decisions, including on programs, and it's never easy to have 20 governments deciding at the same time cooperative programs. As I've said many times, cooperation is difficult, but it's very robust. So yes, the member states of ESA, they have taken decisions on a lot of different programs. Beyond the 10 billion of euro that you were mentioning, I think that there is a good balance between the three main pillars of what ESA is doing. On the one side, it's improving knowledge, all programs which are related to knowledge. The second pillar is competitiveness of European industry, and the third one is services to the citizens. And I think that there is a pretty good balance between these three pillars, because the 10 billions are distributed by, let's say, a little bit more than 4 billions dedicated to knowledge, a little bit more than 3 billions for the competitiveness of European industry, and around 3 billions for services to the citizens. And I would like to underline that all these decisions include cooperation. Knowledge is cooperation with international partners. I think that there is a lot of cooperation with international partners for what concerns knowledge. A lot of cooperation with European industry for what concerns the competitiveness of European industry, to the point that in telecommunications, for example, all telecommunications activities of ESA are made under public-private partnership with the European industry. And for the services to the citizens, it's also a lot of cooperation with partners like EUMETSAT for meteorology, or also, obviously, for programs which are led by the European Commission. So this is a pretty well balanced. Now, coming to your specific questions on launchers. the member states, they were not asked to take a definitive decision on launches. They were asked to start Ariane 6, and we need Ariane 6 for two reasons. First of all, because we need Ariane 6 to launch the government missions of the member states, but also we need Ariane 6 to be more competitive on the commercial market. So Ariane 6, obviously, member states, they could not decide the development of Ariane 6 because we need to have an industrial proposal for that. But Ariane 6 will be decided in 2014. Now, whatever Ariane 6 is, it will not fly before 2020.
So there is time to make a critical decision to transition to Ariane 6 or to maximize the upgraded capabilities of the Ariane 5.
Yes, because Ariane 6 will not fly before 2021, meaning that the operational phase of Ariane 6 will not start before 2023, meaning it's 10 years still to go with Ariane 5. So it was worthwhile to see how we can improve Ariane 5. And the fact is that there is a lot of commonalities between the upper stage of Ariane 6 and the upper stage of the improvement of Ariane 5. So by taking into account these commonalities, the member states, they could decide to embark on the two programs at the same time, but the definitive decisions will be taken in 2014. On the space station, you were saying that
the commitment.
They were vague about...
Director Bolden is here.
They were vague about the space station beyond 2020, but they were not even vague because they were not asked to take any commitment beyond 2020 because the period beyond 2020 is still to be discussed among the partners.
What does your gut feeling tell you? Will ESA commit beyond then?
We shall see, but that we have to discuss that with the partners. I think that this is exactly the question that, and we were discussing that let's say last week with my colleague Monsieur Popovkin, this morning with my colleague Monsieur Volden, and we are working on that. But frankly speaking, myself, and I have always said that, what I would like to avoid is to extend the space station beyond 2020 just because we have not better ideas. So what I would like is just to make sure that the space station
that
is
an
still...
excellent point, which brings me to one follow-up question before we involve the rest of the panel, and that is, do you view these many long years of the International Space Station, do you view the lessons learned and the experiences gained as a template for future big-ticket, major international cooperative programs? And should, in order to encourage international participation, should core competencies be predetermined among potential partners in order to avoid redundancies and maximize efficiencies?
Clearly, we have to, and we have already worked on the lessons learned from the International Space Station, because I have read that the International Space Station is a model of cooperation. Yes, it's a model of cooperation, but does not mean that it cannot be improved. Let's say the space station has been developed, and I think that it's good to get back to the history of the space station, and unfortunately I am old enough to have lived myself the history of the International Space Station. Let's say the International Space Station has evolved into steps to the International Space Station. When I arrived at ESA, I was working myself on Space Station Freedom, and it became the International Space Station in the beginning of the 90s. So we have not started the International Space Station from scratch, from a white piece of paper. We have started the International Space Station as a combination between what was freedom and what was Mir 2. And that came to the International Space Station.
So it's a valuable template for future, a valuable model.
And I think that the most important legacy of the International Space Station is the partnership. The partnership is certainly something irreversible. The International Space Station has changed the world through the partnership. Let's imagine that it was said in the 60s and 70s, USSR and USA were the biggest competitors in human spaceflight. Today, we are in a situation where neither United States nor Russia have a domestic program in human spaceflight. They are working in human spaceflight only through the International Space Station. So that has totally changed the world. So
well, thank you, Mr. Dolan. That's very interesting. And I want to focus now the next question on cost contributions. Money obviously drives a huge extent of international cooperation. And this question is for Mr. Sajezi, who is leading discussions with Israel on this hyperspectral Shalom satellite project. And you, sure from this experience, are well aware of requests by underfunded nations like Israel to be more flexible and accept barter-type agreements rather than, calculated in-kind cash. And I'd like to also reference the recent decision by ESA's recent agreement with NASA to provide one and possibly two propulsion modules for the Orion to help ESA acquit itself of its debt to the space station. That's another, it seems to me, major example of barter in-kind type agreements. So, Mr. Sajezi, what I'd like to ask is whether you expect whether international cooperation in the future will require more willingness by major partners like Italy to be more flexible and accommodating and maybe use some creative accounting with lesser funded nations in order to preserve and fortify cooperative endeavors.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think that the basic starting point is the law that nationally regulates the agency. In Italy, we have two major tasks. One task is to help our scientists to make experiments using space. And the second major aspect that we have to help our industry to become competitive. So looking for cooperation, which is by largely is the most important thing that an agency has to commit itself to do, then I'm pretty sure that there is always something that we can offer, and there is something that we would like to ask for. So on this basis, I think the cooperation is always possible. This means that each agency will cooperate according to what they can really produce, what they can commit themselves to do through their industries without passing on money from one agency to the other. And then maybe that something that is neglected becomes quite important. I mean, for example, the experience that you can find in a nation, the number of scientists, the culture. So there are items which cannot really be quantified in terms of money, but can give rise to have a cooperation. So the situation in Israel is like this one. Maybe they have less money than Italy has. The size also of Israel and the political situation is different, but by sure the experience they've accumulated and the knowledgeable people they have give rise to have, I'm pretty sure, quite an optimal situation for a cooperation. So in the future, this will become more and more important. It is identify the task for each one.
Is it possible, is it even reasonable to expect some type of standardized methodology, some type of consensual way to assess the added value beyond pure budget? Is there any way to assess the added value that budget-strapped partners can bring to the table? Or is it just something based on your experience putting together international programs, all of your experience in trying to cobble it together, do you just go on instinct?
Well, I think that, for example, ExoMars experience tells us that even though you could have everything in your hands to do the project, nevertheless the cooperation will enhance the capability to reach it. Because today we do not have a single program all over the world on which cooperate, but we have many of them. So it is pretty sure that any help you can get in one program, you can repay in a different program. So the money, which in the past was considered as the only mean to really weight the contribution, could become less important, and the availability of resources in some particular fields in that particular moment could become quite a key point to have success. So I'm pretty sure that in the future the cooperation will be based on the actual capability of each nation to contribute in that particular moment, in that particular program.
I think our Israeli guests here are very delighted to hear that assessment. Our next question is for Mr. Newport. And Netherlands is an interesting case because you're a founding member of ESA, but a relatively monetarily low-level investment in ESA programs. Nevertheless, your country has enjoyed tremendous benefits from the cooperative programs with ESA. Your industry of, I don't know, 60 or so small and medium enterprises has this very impressive turnover and the more than 100% return. How, as a regulator, how are you making sure in future that this industry will continue to contribute its added value? Do you at the national level try to avoid wasteful redundancies and unnecessary competition to improve your competitive standing?
Thank you. The Netherlands is a small country, and as a small country we have to be very selective. Spending a space budget is mainly about financing technology development and hardware production. And of course, as you can imagine, every company and every institute in the Netherlands is having its own opinion about where the Netherlands is having to invest. So what you really need, and that's the first step, is to have some kind of national strategy in which you can define what areas you can create the most added value by Dutch industry and Dutch companies. So it is not only a matter of technology development by itself, but also doing it in an environment in which also the end users, so for example scientists or the companies who have to bring the technology in a product to a market, are involved in the technology development process early on. So that's why we have started a road mapping process in which all the entities, the scientists, the technology developers, the companies are involved. And in that context, we are based on a national strategy, are selecting our priorities and the projects belonging to the priorities. So that's a national process in which all institutes and companies are coincide, and in the end the Netherlands Space Office is deciding about the type of projects which will lead to the most added value for the country. And it goes as well for the institutional cooperation within ESA, in which we are cooperating very heavily, of course, but also with an eye to a commercial market and the commercial opportunities which can arise from that. Then about competition within the Netherlands, of course, having a small budget, we don't want to have competition in the Netherlands in itself. It just means that we're going to finance technology development twice in different entities, and that's not very sensible.
Well, that's always the dilemma, isn't it? On the one hand, competition breeds efficiencies, but then ultimately you don't want the redundancies and
there is a lot
turf
of
battles.
There is a lot of competition in space, but not inside the Netherlands. We are too small to have an internal competition, and so our competition is external.
Very good. Our next speaker is Mr. Kendall. This question is for Canada. And how can you share with us your prescription from a regulatory level and how to encourage Canadian industry to remain the relevant and preferred partner for cooperative programs that it has been all these years in the face of, you know, are there any lessons that maybe Canada is starting to learn that you can share with others that are faced with budget cuts, are challenged by the need to remain competitive, and you know, especially with the robotic industry, my editorial office back in Washington, they're very concerned that the budget cuts might cause your industry to atrophy and render Canada less competitive in this field that you've distinguished yourself in so many years.
First of all, I don't think your editorial board needs to worry too much about Canada. I think we're doing quite well. I think the issue, though, that you bring up is an interesting one. Canada has taken, at the federal level, of course, a decision to try and balance its books, let's put it basically, in the next few years. It's been running deficits like many, many countries. And so the government has decided to step back and to ask all government departments over the next 3 years, including the Canadian Space Agency, and you mentioned we have a 10% cut coming up over the next couple of years. And we need to absorb that and to do things more efficiently. It was mentioned in one of the speakers this morning that it's governments can be a little inefficient, and we need to just tighten our belt and make sure that we do things a little bit more efficiently. On the other hand, as you also mentioned, the government has just provided to our industry another approximately $700 million.
Very exciting contract.
To complete the RadarSat Constellation mission, which is a flagship mission, of course. And this year, I count that Canada will be launching, or our partners will be launching for us, 6 small satellites that Canada will launch, which is going to be a banner year for us this year. So I think that we're doing okay. To try and stimulate industry, I think that we have had some stimulus money. You mentioned the robotic sector, which needs to be carefully looked at, but we have had successes there too, of course. I'm sure that you're familiar with the robotic refueling mission, which has just been in the news, very successful. We continue to invest, especially in the careful manipulator, the so-called Dexter manipulator, working with our NASA colleagues, and that's very exciting. We have, at last count, 5 mobility systems in a prototype level that we are currently testing, that came from $110 million of stimulus money that we got from the government, received from the government a couple of years ago, to ensure that the next generation Canadarm, that robotic refueling, robotic servicing missions, and mobility missions that we are concentrating on are being well funded. Clearly, it's always nice to see more money, but I believe that we are in a fairly stable situation with respect to our budgets, and the industry is doing okay. And I don't think I have too many lessons learned, one might say, with respect to that particular element. Let me, though, go back to one question you did mention, and that is, how can larger nations help smaller nations with their space programs? And I sincerely believe that large countries or large space agencies do have a responsibility to ensure that smaller nations who wish to participate in this exciting venture do have the opportunity. And I think that one can see from European Space Agency, from NASA, and from Russia, that mantra has been taken on and has been very, very successfully developed over the past 20, 30 years. As you know, Canada is a cooperative member of ESA. We get to sit around the table of the council meetings, and I have to applaud ESA every time I sit there at the council meetings at the wonderful way that the smaller countries can still participate in the bigger missions due to the way that ESA has itself structured. And any small country within Europe is never refused a seat at the table and a participation to develop, as Jean-Jacques said, their industry and develop their competencies. And I think that that is a tremendous success that the European Space Agency has. And that's why Canada, for over 30 years, has been happy to be a collaborating partner with the European Space Agency.
Thank you very much. Very, very encouraging for the smaller contributing nations. Smaller contributing in dollars, not to denigrate the import of the contribution. Okay, this question is for Mr. Liskov of Russia. And there's 3 launch vehicles that are operating out of ESA's space facility, its launch site in Kourou, French Guiana. There's the heavy lift Ariane 5 and the medium lift Soyuz and the Vega. And I'm wondering, given Italy's interest in upgrading Vega's lift capacity and ESA's probable embrace in future of a smaller Ariane 6, if Russia is concerned at all that you might be squeezed out of a market. Granted, this is for the long term. And on another launch-related issue, and I know that your background is very rich, you have very rich experience in the launch sector of your country and in terms of international cooperation. But it's really interesting that the whole world is exclusively dependent on Russia's Soyuz launcher at the moment. Well, I know there's SpaceX people here in the audience, but at the moment and for the foreseeable future, we will remain exclusively dependent on the Soyuz as a human transport vehicle. And I'm wondering, in contrast to that, I think there's 5 nations, if I'm not mistaken, that are producing cargo vehicles. So, you know, you have 1 here and 5 here, and I'm just wondering if Moscow is open to encouraging some type of consortia, international cooperation to help form the basis of the next generation of human transport vehicles. Please.
Большое спасибо. Большой спектр вопросов.
Thank you very much. This is quite a big range of questions.
Ну, первый вопрос, наверное, это больше нам вместе с господином Барденом задать, поскольку программа «Союз» это все-таки не была инициирована Европейским космическим агентством.
I believe the first question can be addressed both to me and Mr. Dardan, because Soyuz program was launched both by the Russian and the French side.
И, тем не менее, еще Европейское космическое агентство дает более практически 90% загрузки запусками «Союз» с Гвианского космического центра.
And the European Space Agency, it also gives the loads, employs the spaceport in Guyana.
То есть это включает запуски Галилео, научные миссии ЕКО.
I mean the scientific missions of ESA.
Ну, хотелось бы просто остановиться, что это союз с Гвианой, это очень хороший пример нашего сотрудничества с Европейским космическим агентством, с французским космическим агентством и с компанией Arianespace.
I would like to draw this example of Guyana launches because this is quite a good example of our cooperation, successful cooperation with ESA and Arianespace and also CNES.
И загрузка и, скажем так, коммерческие перспективы этого носителя, они определяются не только Российской Федерацией, но совместно с европейскими партнерами.
And the employment as well as the commercial use of this capability, of these facilities, is done not only by the Russian Federation, but it is done jointly with the European side.
И запуски все, они осуществляются совместно вместе с компанией Arianespace.
And all the launches are done together jointly with Arianespace.
Поэтому сейчас, наверное, у меня нет никаких сомнений в том, что тот задел, те инвестиции, которые были вложены в этот проект, они не будут вычеркнуты, и компания Arianespace будет равномерно распределять нагрузки вместе со своими партнерами для того, чтобы использовать Союз в будущем.
That is why I believe the investments made by Arianespace into these facilities and capabilities won't be just forgotten and lost, and Arianespace will be spreading equally the use for all its facilities.
То есть он будет правильно распределять все нагрузки между Арианом, между Союзом, между Вегой, возможно, будущим Арианом 6.
I mean, this employment will be equally spread between Soyuz, Ariane, and Vega, and probably some other launchers in the future.
У меня нет никаких сомнений, то, что он будет востребован.
And I don't have any doubt that Soyuz will be needed and demanded afterwards.
То, что касается второго вопроса,
Concerning your second question,
вы уже вначале объявили, что, наверное, в отличие от других агентств, мы находимся немножко в другой ситуации.
we have already, it was already said in the beginning that our situation is a bit different from the situation of other space agencies.
То есть помимо, вместо сокращения бюджета у нас наоборот очень увеличен бюджет.
Instead of reduction of the budget, our budget is increasing.
И у нас ставится нашим
We're all
правительством.
very envious of that.
Да, нас ставят соответственные амбициозные задачи, которые мы должны решать.
And sure, we have got ambitious tasks to implement.
И, естественно, без широкой международной кооперации решения их, они будут сомнительны, конечно.
And implementation of such like tasks is quite doubtful without the wide international cooperation.
Very nice. Mr. Oh, sorry. Please.
Если у нас, естественно, в прошлом году у нас утверждена государственная программа.
And last year, the state program was approved.
Которая определяет нашу программу и развитие до 2020 года.
Which defines our program and our development up to 2020.
В рамках данной программы одним из приоритетов является иметь гарантированный доступ России в космос.
And one of the program priorities is for Russia to have the guaranteed access to space.
То есть существующий корабль «Союз» уже старый и не всегда отвечает тем потребностям современным, которые существуют на данный момент.
And Soyuz spaceship, which exists today, it's quite old and it does not meet always the requirements given by today's time.
И в рамках данной программы у нас запланировано создание новой перспективной транспортной системы нового поколения, которая принципиально должна решить задачи как ближнего космоса, так и миссий, лунных миссий.
And that is why, in the perspective of this program, we have got the creation, the development of the new transport vehicle, the aim of which will be as both the closed space as well as the moon.
By when do you think this will become a reality? What's the target for this?
Наша цель к 2020 году, чтобы эта система у нас работала уже.
2020 is the target year for the system to be operated already.
Wow. Well, thank you, Dennis. Thank you. Mr. Sajesi, I didn't want to unintentionally mischaracterize your plans for Vega. Would you care to clarify what Italy has 65% equy in Vega?
Correct.
What are you seeking to enlarge the lift capacity, and how will do you have a finalized plan for that?
Yeah, Vega, as you know, is an ESA program. We are developing in ESA with the cooperation of 7 nations. As usual, there is one nation who takes the lead, and Italy has paid 2/3 of the overall program. The objective of Vega is to have an efficient, low cost, I would say very, very low cost, but low cost transport to go to LEO. At the moment we have 1.5 ton at 700 kilometers. We have encouraged other member states of ESA, like Germany, who has agreed, and even UK, who could agree, to enter within Vega with the idea to arrive to 2-3 tons in LEO orbit. So we will not be a competitor of Soyuz, and we will not be a competitor of Ariane 6. But nevertheless, there are some breakthrough technologies that are coming now in the States, and also in Europe we are studying, that is electrical propulsion. Electrical propulsion is an idea which in the old times comes from Russia. There are technologies here in Israel, in Italy.
You're in Israel, Raphael.
Everywhere. And the idea is to trade off mass against the time. So from LEO to GEO, you can arrive in 2 hours with 2 tons of fuel, or you can arrive with 20 kilos of fuel, but in 10 months. So maybe for many applications, even telecommunication in GEO, you will use in future Vega in such a way that you decrease by a rate of 3-4 times the cost of the overall system for GEO. So this is one of the subjects of future cooperation that we have with Israel, and we already have in ESA large programs on this item.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see. Future. It's so hard to form a consensus on the priorities, future directions, where so many options, so many obstacles in terms of national strategic interests of national pride, with those interests of the collective, that would benefit the collective. I'm sure Mr. Daudin and all of you gentlemen are dealing with this on a daily basis. I'm just going to throw out a few points. For example, space exploration. Obviously no one can go it alone, but there's no real consensus what's the destination? Is it going to be Jupiter? Is it going to be asteroids? Is it going to be the far side of the moon? That's a huge issue, and if the priority should be put on space exploration, should it be manned or robotic? Conversely, maybe the priority should be placed on Earth sciences, and if so, there seems to be so many, there's, let's say, healthy competition bordering on unhealthy redundancies in the Earth observation field. So with all of these issues to grapple with, I understand that Mr. Sajesi and others are involved in this global exploration strategy, but from a cynic like me, it sounds like a lot of lip service. I don't know what's really coming of that. So would you please care to share your views about how to reach consensus on the critical strategic directions that we need to go in terms of international cooperation for the future?
I think that, first of all, within ESA, because within ESA we need already a consensus, because it's 20 countries cooperating, and we know what means consensus. And clearly, the ESA member states, they've put their priority on Earth observation. Earth observation activities at ESA is by far the biggest budget of ESA. It's 1/3 of the ESA budget is just dedicated to Earth observation, be it science or services. That it's, first of all, the consensus among member states. Because you are speaking of exploration. Let's say the biggest target for exploration is planet Earth. The understanding of planet Earth is by far the priority of the ESA member states. And that is a fact. Now, obviously, for what concerns the science part of Earth observation, we are more than open to cooperation. And by the way, we are cooperating on Earth observation with a lot of different countries, with the United States, with Japan. We are sharing a lot of data in terms of science. Now, in terms of services, it may be different, because the data are not only for understanding, but it's also to get information which can be very important for economy. Speaking of meteorology, there is a significant economic dimension behind meteorology. And that, obviously, when you are speaking of economy, competition is not far. So clearly, cooperation for science, competition when there is an economic dimension. That is the first criterion. That is for Earth observation. Now for exploration. Clearly, the ESA member states, they have not put a priority on human spaceflight. Human spaceflight is part of the ESA program, but the ESA member states are spending less than 10% in human spaceflight. And we have not the means in ESA to take the lead on any human spaceflight exploration. And this is the reason why the priority today is on robotic exploration. It does not mean that the ESA member state do not want to embark on human space exploration, but they cannot take the lead.
In that respect, your NASA still is in the driver's seat on that to influence that?
NASA and Russia and China. I would not like to forget China, but in the world today there are 3 space powers which can have a domestic human spaceflight. As I said already, United States and Russia, they have chosen not to have any more domestic human spaceflight. And this is the reason why they are the leaders. But we, the ESA member states, they are ready to contribute, but they cannot take the lead because we have not the capabilities. We have no transportation system. There was a breakthrough recently because NASA, for the first time, has accepted to put ESA on the critical path of the multipurpose crew vehicle. So it's a step. We are not yet the leader by far, but at least we are on the critical path of a crew transportation system. But clearly, there are domains where you can take initiative and where you can take the lead. And we can take the lead on Earth observation, clearly. We can maybe not take the lead, but we can take initiatives on robotic exploration.
Can you address in the sector of Earth sciences, can you address the redundancies or the tendency sometimes for nations in their own understandable national interest to go forth with bilateral turnkey cooperative programs rather than collective programs under the framework of ESA?
Well, I think that within
should there be some adult supervision or some type of expectations or penalties or I don't know what?
There is no redundancy between what the member states of ESA are doing individually or bilaterally and the ESA program. And the reason is very simple. They are the ones to take the decision, and they are not stupid enough to pay on a national part and on the ESA part something which is redundant. So I think that the member states of ESA are not so stupid. So they are using ESA when ESA is the right framework. They are using national programs or bilateral programs when they consider that it's better to do that on the national side. So let's say in Europe, I think that the coordination is made because the member states are under control. Your question is more relevant to international cooperation.
With extra ESA cooperation.
So that it's a little bit more difficult, but as I said, if it's only science, it's not a problem. I think that we can talk, and we are talking on purely scientific Earth observation programs. But the borderline between science and services is not so easy to define. And on services, the situation is different because services, you are talking not only of environment, but you are also talking of security, and you are talking also of economy. So the borderline is not so easy to draw, and this is the reason why not so easy to cooperate.
Gare, it looks like, thank you, Mr. Dodon. Garrett, looks like it sounds like you have something that you'd like to contribute to this.
Well, in your question is an assumption, and that cooperation is good and that competition is bad, and that is maybe true for cooperation between governments, but it's not true for a market. And Earth observation is more than navigation, is going to be a market in which there is a market for a lot of economic activities. So the question there is, can you integrate a chain from an end user back by an application developer to an instrument and to a complete mission, so that the market will finance the mission. And if that's true, for example, in areas like agriculture or water, and you can finance in that way the space infrastructure, then you're on a normal market, and on a normal market is competition. It's true only in a sense as you would talk about big public infrastructure like GMES. Does it have any sense that every continent is having its own GMES system? But it's not true if you're talking about the market. And I think Earth observation, more than others, is having a huge potential for economic activities, and it's important that space then crosses the border to all those other areas and try to attract them to business activities in which space can deliver data, but the real economic activities are outside space.
That's an excellent point of clarification, thanks. Mr. Kendall.
Yes, I would like to challenge you on your statement that it doesn't seem that very much is going on in exploration right now, because I think that there is a tremendous amount of...
I was referring to this NGO amorphous type of group called the Global Exploration Strategy Program, which has a very admirable and seemingly necessary goal, but it's hard to see any any type of relevance or authority behind their effort.
Well, I think the group is trying very hard to bring the various partners, which include China, into and the partners that you see around this table, and of course our friends in the United States, in India, and Japan, who are not represented, Korea, who are not represented just at this panel. But I think that all those countries are now trying to, at the program level, are now trying to discuss options, look at future plans, share information, which is of course part of where we need to be going. And those countries are really, in my opinion, doing a lot of very noble and important robotic work. Just think of the number of countries who have gone to the moon over the past few years. Just think of the work that's being done in Japan with the Hayabusa asteroid, and the work that's of course being done by NASA and ExoMars with ESA, etc. There is a tremendous amount of robotic exploration and human startup activities with respect to exploration. Now, I will make a point here which is a personal point and not a point coming from the Canadian Space Agency. Like Jean-Jacques, I am of an age where I remember the build-up towards the International Space Station. We heard a wonderful talk just before this panel on the history. And if you remember the time, which we do, before the International Space Station became a reality and before the international agreements were signed, there was a tremendous amount of, I would say, noise and discussion as to what we were really talking about. In the end, and again, this is where the personal view comes, not the agency view, it took political leadership to develop the future of what we know as the most effective international cooperation that's ever taken place, which I think one can classify the International Space Station in that way. Right now, of course, that political leadership is being developed, I would say. But we're clearly not at a point where the countries at the political level have said, this is where we're going to go.
Bingo, that's the issue, yes. One final concluding issue, and Safak Mon and Talin Bar from the Fisher Institute asked me to shy away from politics, but if you'll excuse me, I want to end on with a issue, a bit of a political hot potato. let's acknowledge that the most dynamic space program today is not in the United States, with all due respect. It's not in Europe, and it's not in Russia, but it's in China. And I'm wondering, I'd like to hear your views about whether, for example, in the ministerial meeting in November, even the most modest proposals to enhance confidence-building measures with an eye toward meaningful cooperation with China did not win support by the member countries. There's still very high fences around China. In the United States, it's much more severe. There was a very dramatic new export law that was signed by President Obama earlier this month, and it really does remove a lot of the space components and technologies that were originally on the munitions list regulated by State Department, and it takes them and puts them back in commerce, where I think most of you would agree they belong, but that doesn't affect China. China's, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think China's blocked from participating meaningfully in this space station. And my question to the panel, just throwing it out there, is whether you're concerned that, you might be sidelined by this Chinese train that might be leaving the station and leaving the Americans and the Europeans and the Russians behind. Alternatively, you may not be sidelined. That might be a little bit far-fetched. I apologize. But if you're not sidelined, at least maybe cut out of a lucrative market niche that you otherwise could have enjoyed would barriers have been eased a bit vis-a-vis cooperation with China. So who wants to start? Mr. Dodin.
Just to start by a fact, I don't think, because the program that we are referring to at the council at ministerial level was Kuafu, I don't think that the lack of contribution to Kuafu is linked to China. I think that it is linked to the fact that the member states, they had to make priorities, and within budget constraints, they have decided not to finance Kuafu. And by the way, there is other small programs which have disappeared from the council at ministerial level, because sometimes you can have the impression that it's easier to finance a small programs than to finance a big program. That my experience is not with that. I think that, so Kuafu has disappeared, and in my view, not because of China. By the way, a lot of ESA member states are cooperating with China on a bilateral basis, so why should not they cooperate within ESA? And by the way, we are cooperating with China. The very first scientific satellite of China has been made in cooperation with ESA. It was Double Star, and Double Star of China has been made, and China appreciates that. And I can tell you that the name of ESA is still popular in China, because Double Star has been made because it's ESA which has given produced the instruments of Double Star, because they were the instruments of clusters. So we are cooperating with China. With the Russian, we have made the simulation of Mars 500, and for the first time there was a crew made of 3 Russians, 2 ESA and 1 Chinese. So we are not cut from China, and by the way, the European Commission is also talking with China on Galileo. So I don't think that there is a wall with China now.
But wasn't the proposal to enhance confidence building and all this proposal was not supported in your recent meeting in November, correct?
Yes, but the mission which was on the table was Kuafu, which was a space weather mission together with China, and we were discussing with China, and okay, the member states, they have decided not to finance Kuafu, but again,
you personally do support that, though, don't you?
No, I was supporting Kuafu, yes, because it was, but maybe much less than it was China, but because of the interest of the mission, because space weather is an important science mission. But okay, the member states, they have budget constraints and they have decided not to finance that, but no member states told me that they were not contributing to that mission because it was with China. It was because of the priority that they were giving to the different missions. So I don't think that there is a wall, at least for what concerns the ESA member states, between member states and China. Now, obviously, there is also industrial interests which are not so easy to tackle with China, but I would say not so easy to tackle with United States and not so easy to tackle with Russia also. So, because the technology transfer and the industrial interests are not absent from discussions on cooperation.
Thank you. And
well, if I can add a few things. Of course, the cooperation with China is a must. Recently, I was invited to assist one of their launches. I said, okay, tell me the date. They told me, please come any week we have a launch. So, of course, as you said, this is a major power, and we have to cooperate. The human exploration is one of the areas in which the cooperation has to be defined. Also, to be honest among ourselves, we need to have a presence around the Earth. Of course, the International Space Station, we have decided till 2020, but by 2020, Chinese will have their own station, fully available. So we should decide what to do in the future. Should we go to the moon or around the moon and then leave the Chinese around the Earth, or vice versa? I think that these items are quite important. The cost
you are
of
so
the mission,
charismatic and you have much influence within ESA. So
I have the money.
Perhaps you and Mr. Dordain together can...
Jean-Jacques has the ideas, but the problem is the money. No, I think that the major point is that we feel, honestly, since the major cost of the International Space Station is carried on by USA, we feel that we should receive an hint, a basic idea from USA. I'm pretty sure that also in the future, human exploration will be on the shoulders of few states, but mainly USA and Russia. So we think that we have to wait until they are ready. The other important item is to do what? Cooperate to go where? For what purposes? So this discussion is very open all around the world. And 2 years ago, we have decided together with the USA and everybody to discuss this item furthermore. And if I can spend a word in favor of USA, they don't need, of course, but I will do the same. They will host a conference this year, at the end of this year, and China is invited for the first time in the history. So this means that the cooperation is over there. So the other major point is to demonstrate that we can take out a profit. So somebody is studying the way to go to the asteroid and carry back an asteroid, or to have other ideas like this one. So I think that even though exploration by itself is important, nevertheless the economics in this crisis moment are quite an important item. We should invent a motivation, a stronger motivation for a stronger cooperation.
Thank you, Mr. Sagesi. And we get back to Mr. Kendall's point that it requires leadership. Well, I just wanted to give you the credit of that fundamental point that you made. I would like to end with our Russian guest, Denis, vis-a-vis Russia's position on China, the need to develop cooperation with Beijing.
Мне довольно легко будет ответить на этот вопрос, поскольку у нас между Российской Федерацией и Китаем существует совместная комиссия
It's quite easy for me to answer this question because between the Russian Federation and China there is a joint commission.
Как раз я возглавляю с российской стороны вот комиссию по сотрудничеству в области космоса.
And I'm the head of this commission from the Russian side in the area of cooperation within the area of space.
И я вот согласен с нашими коллегами, что, возможно, создается такое мнение об отсутствии сотрудничества, поскольку нет таких крупных масштабных проектов, которые на слуху у всех.
And probably I would agree with my colleagues that such impression is given by the absence of large-scale joint projects with China.
То есть у нас большая очень программа сотрудничества, которая продолжается несколько лет, и они носят больше такие небольшого характера проекты.
Our project, our program of joint activities with China is quite vast, but still these activities are not of large scale.
То есть и на данном этапе мы сейчас как раз и начали процесс обсуждения сотрудничества с Китаем в рамках крупных проектов, масштабных. И в первую очередь они касаются научного космоса.
And now we are at the phase of negotiating with China more large scale and more significant projects. And first of all, they concern the scientific space.
И в данное время у нас как раз идет и процесс обсуждения вот таких потенциальных направлений сотрудничества, и также вот по системе КайФУ, который вот с Европейским космическим агентством, изучение Венеры и будущих других миссий.
And now we are in the process of discussing the possible areas of cooperation with China, including also the Kwafu project, as well with the participation of ESA and also other projects for scientific research.
Поэтому, в принципе, у нас есть хорошая база для начала крупного сотрудничества.
That is why we have got quite a good base for the beginning of larger scale cooperation.
Well, as a journalist, I look forward to reporting on your progress with cooperation with the Chinese, and I thank all of you, distinguished gentlemen, for this discussion. I learned a lot, and thank you so much for your time.